Hey guys, welcome to my kitchen where I bake all the nostalgic German bakes from my childhood because, well, it's a lot easier and cheaper than flying all the way back to Germany. And today, I'm so excited, we're making a Pear Frangipane Tart. Whee! It's basically a sweet, crumbly, short crust pastry with a nutty almond cream called Frangipane and juicy pears. Let's talk about the pears. Now, some recipes call for poaching the pears first, and while I love a good poached pear, we don't need to mess with that in this tart. You want some nice, ripe, firm pears, so that way they're gonna hold their beautiful shape when we bake them. You don't want them too squishy or overripe because then they're just gonna become pear sauce, like basically mush, and you don't want that. The pears will soften as they bake and they'll become deliciously sweet and tender. Anyways. Another thing that I want to know is the tart pan that we're going to be baking in. I'm going to be using a metal tart pan. I actually found this in an old vintage store, but I love it because it has a removable bottom. So that way it's really easy to take your tart out of the tin once you bake it and then slice it and serve it. You can also use a springform pan, which also has a removable bottom. But since this tart in particular is going to have a really short side, this one might be a little bit harder to use since it has higher walls. Up to you. So let's get started. First, we're going to make the crust. And I personally like this crust because instead of having to chill the crust and roll it out, we're not going to mess with any of that. We're actually going to make a press-in crust. So let's do this. Add 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Add a 1/4 cup of sugar, granulated sugar. Add a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You want to use fine sea salt or table salt, not kosher salt. Give that a little whisk to combine. And then we're going to melt 1 stick of butter in the microwave. Now, here's a little trick for you. We're going to take our butter. We're going to melt this in the microwave, but then the wrapper of the butter that's all kind of covered in butter, we're going to use that to grease our tart tin. So you can just take it, that buttery side, and rub it all along your tart tin and it'll be greased. No butter wasted. Then we can add our melted butter and stir it with a large spoon. Then, once it resembles really fine crumbs, and you don't see any pockets of dry flour, we can add it into our tart tin. So at first we're just going to add half of the tart dough and then use your fingers to press it into the sides of your tart pan. Once you have all the walls of your tart pressed in, we can add the bottom. Pour the rest of your dough into your tart pan, then use your fingers again to press it into the middle. Now we're forming the base of the tart in the center. Finally, we'll use the tongs of a fork to press about a dozen times into the tart. Bake your tart for about 10 minutes at 350 degrees. Now, while our crust pre-bakes or par bakes, we're going to make the Frangipane filling. In a large mixing bowl, we're going to mix 1/2 cup of granulated sugar with 6 tablespoons of softened butter. And you want this to be soft enough where when you press your finger in it, it leaves an indentation, but not too soft where it's melty and oily. And you want to beat your butter and sugar together until it's pale and fluffy. To this, we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon salt, 2 eggs, and the trick is to make sure that these are at room temperature so they've been sitting out for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes depending on how warm your kitchen is, so that way they incorporate into the Frangipane really well. If you use cold eggs, what's going to happen is the cold eggs are going to hit the room temperature butter and it's going to curdle and be just no good. And then we're also going to add some almond extract. This is going to amp up the almond flavor. Add a generous 2 teaspoons. I recommend using blanched almond flour. Here you can see the difference between whole almond flour or almond meal and blanched almond flour. Almond meal has those flecks of dark brown in it because it still has the skin on with it. If you use this in your Frangipane tart, which I have tested before, it still tastes great. It's even more nutty. However, it's going to make your tart a little bit drier and a little bit more gritty. That's why I prefer using blanched almond flour, because it's going to be a little bit softer, it's going to have a lighter, more uniform color, but it's still going to have that beautiful almond flavor. So go ahead and add in 1.5 cups of blanched almond flour. And then mix that again. At this point, your frangipane should be looking nice and creamy, so we can go ahead and set that aside. Finally, we can get to cutting our pears. Now, I personally recommend using Bartlett, Bosc, or Anjou pears because they hold their shape the best once they're baked. If you use some other varieties, they could get mushy once they go into the oven. It's totally up to you if you want to peel your pears. I personally don't like peeling them because I love the beautiful color that stays on the pears once they're baked, and I feel like the peel on the pear also helps them hold their shape. So first up, you just want to cut your pear in half. And what we don't want is those seeds and the fibrous core in the middle. So we're gonna slice around those. Now it's totally up to you how you decide to slice your pear. The biggest thing overall though is you want your pears to be sliced thinly so that way they become soft once they're baked. All right, so this is what our crust looks like after we've par baked it for about 10 minutes. Not much different, but I promise it makes a world of difference. Now we can take our frangipane filling and add that all over the tart. And then you can just use a spatula or even a butter knife to smooth it all out evenly over your tart. You want to make sure it's level so that way each bite gets an equal amount of frangipane. Now, finally, we can arrange our pears onto our frangipane tart. You can decorate it however you want. The basic and most simple way is to just kind of lay it all out, basically dump it on, and bake it. However, here's an opportunity to get a little creative. Now you could take a few pieces of roughly the same size and then kind of fan them out. So when you lay it down, it kind of looks like a little fan. Or you could line them up and still fan them out, so it's kind of a variation on that. Alternatively, you can get really creative and layer the sides together like this all the way around in a spiral, which creates a really, really beautiful flower pattern. All right, once you finish decorating your pear tart with all of your pear slices, we can bake it. So we're gonna put this in the oven at 350 for 45 to 50 minutes, just until that frangipane has puffed up and become golden. All right, friends, our tart is now out of the oven. As you can see, the frangipane in the middle has turned lightly golden brown, and all the pears have kind of gotten this really pretty, like, wavy situation. So let it cool for about 20 minutes, and then we can release it from the tart pan and slice it with a serrated knife.